Thank you, Chelsea. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to be tag teaming this with Patrick Campbell. We're covering two different notice of funding opportunities today, workforce innovation grants and talent pipeline management grants. I'll be handling the workforce innovation side, and Patrick will be handling the other. So we're going to go through this. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them into the chat pod on the left side of your screen, and we will address those before we get off today. So let's jump right into this. We are recording this webinar so people can look at it later. One caveat I want to make everyone aware of who might be viewing that recorded version of this webinar. We will have some FAQ pages established. Actually, we do have FAQ pages established on Illinois WorkNet. There'll be links to those pages in the presentation later today. But we'll be offering guidance based on the NOFOs and our understanding of how everything needs to work today, and going through all of the options and requirements. However, as we also plan some in-person bidders conferences for this, and questions may be raised that are slightly different or similar, but slightly different than what we cover today. So be sure to check the FAQ page regularly as you're filling out your applications to make sure that the latest and most accurate guidance is used when you submit your application. I don't anticipate that any guidance would change dramatically, but there may be a nuance that's helpful to you. And just to make everyone aware, the online guidance at the FAQ page will take precedent over anything said today. Again, not a big issue, but just want to make sure everyone's aware that that information will be available online to everybody, and to make use of that when you're doing your applications. Okay. So our first grant opportunity we're going to talk about is the Illinois Workforce Innovation Project. Essentially, we are looking at innovation projects that support the vision, principles, goals of the state plan. The notice of funding opportunity has a link directly to the state plan, so if you're not familiar with all the material in there, you can go read the entire plan in its entirety at that link. However, for those of you who have never seen the plan, I'm going to give you the highlights of it here. I'm not going to read this to you. You all can read. But this is the main vision statement from the governor's office, the state workforce board, the core partner leaders work together to collaborate on what is the vision for workforce development in the state of Illinois. And this vision essentially meaning we are going to integrate education, workforce, and economic development, and we are going to help people that have barriers to employment, overcome them to be able to enter the workforce in a good paying job, and we are going to help businesses improve their access to skilled workers, and both of those things working together help improve the state's economy. The 8 main principles that are in play in the state plan that we would like all of these projects to tie back to some of these, as many of these as possible actually. We want to be demand driven for what businesses need. Develop strong partnerships with businesses at all levels, at the state level, the regional level, and local level. We want to look at creating clear pathways to good paying jobs. Some individuals may have, their immediate capacity might be entry level, but we want to set them up to move up a career pathway to their fullest potential in the future. So we're wanting to look at not just getting people a job, but as best as possible setting them up for future success by allowing them to start on a career pathway. All of these rest of these are relatively straightforward. If you've got a project idea for helping a target population, such as individuals with disabilities, returning veterans, homeless individuals, whatever it might be. If you have an idea that would better serve those individuals, that would be something that would be given consideration. We're also looking for clear metrics, ways to measure the impact of what it is that we're trying to do. So with any kind of innovation, there's experimentation, and we want to be able to see what kind of impact the project may have had on what it was trying to accomplish. So those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure these projects embed into their plan. There are kind of two sets of goals in the state plan. As I alluded to, we have two main constituencies that are both equally important. We have job seekers and we have businesses. So our main goal for creating an educated and skilled workforce is looking at career pathway opportunities. How can we provide education and training to individuals, help them earn industry-recognized credentials, help them get that piece of paper that employers value that can help them enter the workforce or move up the workforce if they're already in. And if people have a barrier to employment, we want to help them get rid of that barrier. On meeting the needs of businesses, we're looking at helping to expand business-led or business-driven sector partnerships in regions across the state. Sectors that are vital in the state's economy are things like manufacturing, transportation, distribution, logistics, healthcare, could be IT, could be hospitality in a particular region. So you need to be working with and looking at your regional plans. Those are available on Illinois WorkNet. We have links to that later. And if you want to look at the regional plans to see what's happening in a particular region, I would encourage you to do that. In our Notice of Funding Opportunity, we specifically say these are the kinds of projects that we are hoping to fund. So we want to look at projects that are expanding or helping establish or make existing sector partnerships more robust. So think of that not in terms of sectoral projects, like we have a manufacturing project, like we want to train some manufacturing workers. That's sectoral work. That's not necessarily a sector project, a sector partnership project. What we're looking for here is our efforts and projects and opportunities to help businesses come together along with the education partners, the workforce system, economic development partners, community-based organizations. How can we help foster an environment where businesses and all these other stakeholders come together and work in a unified fashion for whatever sectors might be relevant in the state or regional economies? We're also looking for pilot and research projects. You have a new way of providing services that hasn't been done in Illinois before. That's the kind of project that we'd like to fund here. As I said earlier, priority populations like returning citizens, people coming out of incarceration, veterans, individuals with disabilities or other barriers to employment, youth or other minorities could be a target population. And then our last opportunity or our last priority is statewide technical assistance projects, meaning that if there is an issue with workforce implementation that needs to be addressed, this funding opportunity could be used to develop capacity, pay for training, perhaps look at particular kinds of technology solutions to a common problem that would be beneficial to the workforce system and its partners across the state. So that's kind of a big picture look at what we're trying to accomplish. Note also that your projects may, but do not have to, provide direct services to individual clients. If you do want to do a project that serves individuals and provides services, you have to make sure those individuals are eligible for the program, and your project would have to meet established performance requirements. For those of you who are with a local workforce area and are already doing WIOA eligibility assessments, you're good to go. If you're an organization that does not do WIOA eligibility assessments, you need to partner up with someone who does, and Patrick will have more information on that in his part as well. Okay, who can apply? These are not grants to individual people. Occasionally we will get a phone call or an inquiry. We are in the big book of government funding available, and people will ask us to fund adding a porch to their double wide. That's not what this is about. To apply for this grant, you need to be a public or private organization in good standing with the Secretary of State, meaning you have all of your paperwork filed, you're not delinquent on your taxes, those sorts of things. You also have to, when you fill out your application, we'll ask you to describe what is your agency's or what's your organization's capacity to handle federal funding, to actually accomplish what it is that you're proposing that you would like to do in your project. Like, do you have a history of trying to do those sorts of things and being able to do them successfully? We're also would expect to see what is the impact going to be if this project were funded, and why is that relevant? And then some projects could be applicable to other areas of the state. We might be doing a pilot project in a limited geographic area, but if it works there, it could be applied to other areas of the state. So those are the kinds of things that we would be looking for. Applications are due no later than May 1st to receive full consideration. You do not have to wait that long to apply. The Notice of Funding Opportunity has directions on how to apply in the application and links to those sorts of things. So if you're ready to go, you can apply at any time. But if you apply after May 1, you may be put off until the next funding cycle. So that's just how that will go. So everyone's on notice for that. So what does a successful application look like? What would it have in it? So it really boils down to being able to answer the basic what is the what, why, how, who, and where of what you're trying to propose and accomplish with your project. So don't overthink it. We don't grade and review applications on volume, by weight. So we encourage you to be thorough in your responses to the questions, but there's no need to drone on and on saying the same thing repeatedly. We just want to understand clearly what it is you're trying to accomplish. So be sure that you identify what is the problem or issue that you want to address. Why is that relevant? Is it a statewide issue, or is it endemic maybe to a particular region of the state? What specific goals and strategies are you proposing to address that problem or issue? And what is innovative about those goals and strategies? And then what organizations are you partnering with that are going to be part of this? Not to say that you have to have a bunch of people or a bunch of organizations coming together to do something. It just depends on what you're trying to get done. But what we're going to look for is if you are saying we are going to impact a certain population, or we're going to partner with economic development, we're going to want to see some evidence that the economic development organizations are on board with your game plan and are willing participants. We want to see, where this project is going to impact. Is it a county? Is it a local workforce area? Is it a region? Or is it statewide? A few more items, and I've alluded to some of these already. What is your experience and capacity to handle the project that you are proposing? If it is a project that deals with meeting business needs or partnering with business, we're going to want to see evidence that you have businesses or business associations or collectives on board with your project. Is your budget reasonable? And what is the return on investment? So we can look at funding a very wide range of dollar amount projects. I believe the NOFO says up to $500,000. But if you've got a $25,000 idea that is very much value added, that might be, we would definitely want to take a look at that. So my advice is, request what is reasonable for you to fully accomplish what it is that you're hoping to do. We will have, for applications that are successful, we may have some fine-tuning conversations between what you submitted and what finally ends up being developed for a scope of work for a grant. But that's kind of smoothing out any rough edges or clarifying something typically. But basically, we want to be able to see that this is a good investment of public funds. So we want to know what you're trying to get done, and you're going to be able to do it for a reasonable cost to the taxpayers. And then, if it's applicable, is this project repeatable somewhere else? And if it is a major change or an innovative change in how the workforce system operates, is this something that could be sustained or embedded in local workforce funding? Or are there other funding sources that could help keep a project going after the initial grant or the initial seed money expires? The thing to keep in mind is for these innovation grants, these are not intended to be long-term, ongoing support of a project. Our intent is to provide seed funding for people to try out new things or to address issues that are necessary to be addressed. But after our grant is expired, either the issue has been handled or there is another ongoing funding source that could take over the effort and continue it on long term. And that is it for my piece. I would suggest to make sure we get all the content in, Patrick, go ahead and present your material, and then we can both address questions as we go along. So I'm going to mute my phone and turn it over to Patrick.
Great, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. Much of what Mike talked about is very much consistent with this second grant opportunity, which is the Illinois Talent Pipeline Management Grant. And so the first slide that we have here is projects are funded under the Illinois Talent Pipeline Program. These are intended to develop sustainable work-based learning programs to help Illinois companies retain and train current workers and hire new hires of staff. So we are looking for programs that are not at the kind of theoretical stage. We are looking for where Mike might take more of that on. We are certainly looking for funding projects that have been clearly articulated and well thought through. So that's something that's really important to us when we're looking at these. We get an awful lot of applications of, if you'll give us the funding, we'll figure out how to do it. And that's not going to work very well with this particular grant opportunity. So applications considered for funding address one or more of the talent pipeline initiatives listed below. Projects that connect talent strategies with business needs. So business connection is very, very important in this particular opportunity. Layoff aversion was instrumental in us creating this whole grant opportunity, and it plays an important role in reaching out to incumbent worker groups. And so we'll address in further slides, we'll address some of those topics and issues. Projects that expand work-based learning opportunities. So when we say that, we're talking about projects that are not just necessarily apprenticeship projects, although we certainly favor working towards either a pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship programs. We are also, always open to entertaining work-based learning, working with a business to develop a structure or a model that is going to best fit their needs. And in some cases that may be an apprenticeship, in a registered apprenticeship. In other cases that may not be. And you may just want to work with classroom training, or you may just want to work with work-based learning or on-the-job training, or you may want to work with both of those together in a combination. I'm not going to go through too much of this particular slide. It is the regional partners. It just identifies, who WIOA and OET generally has been working with, along with our Department of Commerce and the organizations and entities that are part of our overall agency. There are 6 key concepts to a successful talent pipeline grant. Now we have changed that up over this last cycle, and we have learned a lot of things through the last 4 or so years of administering these talent pipeline grants. So those of you that have been grantees in the past, we've added a couple of things. Those of you that have not, we've expanded it to maximize and eliminated items that weren't quite as successful. So we're going to start off with the 6 key concepts for a successful application with the eligible group to be served. This particular grant serves incumbent workers, dislocated workers, and adults. So we'll kind of talk briefly about the incumbent workers. The incumbent workers obviously are workers that are currently working at that facility. They must meet the eligibility criteria, so they must have worked there for a particular amount of time. And then we're looking for the following specific risk factors. And this is how we're able to fund this through the layoff aversion portion of this. They need to have experienced declining sales, supply chain issues, industry market trends, changes in management, philosophy or ownership, worker lacks the necessary skills, or there's a strong possibility of a new job if the worker attains these skills. So from the grantee's perspective, they will have needed to talk to companies and find out which one of these risk factors or multiple risk factors most applies to that company. And then there is a document that is identifying the risk factors and that you would fill out as the grant applicant and identify what these risk factors are so that incumbent workers might be included in your grant. Okay, so the next group to be served or that could potentially be served is dislocated workers. And these are individuals who've lost their job due to no fault of their own through a closure or a layoff. We have some flexibility with that in terms of what has traditionally, for those grantees or for those local workforce areas that are on the phone, what has traditionally been thought of as a state closing or a a local closing or layoff. So we have some flexibilities. With that, we can combine, and we certainly can open that up to some questions related to identifying what is an event, et cetera. This year is the first year that we have also opened this opportunity to serve adults under this grant. So, in the past, we have only had it open to the two categories, which is dislocated workers and which would be incumbent workers. And now we have opened it up to the adult population, and we think there's a lot of crossover, and we think there's a lot of great opportunities to kind of serve both of those. I do want to just step back for a second, back to the incumbent worker, which I did breeze over. There's on page 13 of the NOFO. We want to make sure that I'm very clear about this, and in reading the notice of funding opportunity, it could be interpreted in different ways. I know that on page 13 of the definitions, it does say matching funds are not required. And so matching funds are not required for the other two categories. But for incumbent worker, there is a minimum matching fund of 10% for incumbent workers. And I think I addressed that in a future slide, more details on that matching fund. But I did want to be clear about that regarding the matching fund. So if you are serving incumbent workers, there is matching funds that can be met in several ways. Another point of clarification is that although youth is mentioned several times because of the WIOA Act throughout the NOFO, this grant opportunity is not intended to fund youth. Now, this first concept of the 6 key concepts for this is important because when you're citing who will be served from your grant, and it could be a combination. You could be doing some of your grants could be going towards incumbent worker. Some of your grants could be going towards adult and dislocated workers. But you must identify where these groups are coming from. How have you concluded that these will be your groups that you're going to work with? Is it connected through an industry sector that you have some historical tie to? Are you located geographically in that particular area or familiar with working with those folks from that geographic area? And by that specifically, I mean a local workforce area that is very familiar with that particular county or group of dislocated workers, incumbent workers, et cetera, that you'd like to serve. So what we don't want to see is we're going to work with 40 dislocated workers, and we're going to reach out to the IWTF office and the local workforce area to seek a connection with those dislocated workers. Although that is fine to put into your grant application, it is not sufficient in meeting our expectation of clearly identifying those eligible dislocated workers to be served. We would look for something more specific, like dislocated workers that are from a particular company that have transferable skills within a sector or industry that you've already clearly identified and you've talked to the LWIA, or you are an LWIA or a provider to the local workforce area. And so those are the kinds of connections that we're looking for when we say you're identifying those to be served in your grant. So the next key concept is the training concept. We've covered who will the participants be. The next key concept is the training towards employment. There are multiple kinds of training that can be utilized in combination with each other in this grant. So we've got the work-based learning. Some of you may know this as on-the-job training. We've got pre-apprenticeships, and with the pre-apprenticeships, what we're looking for is training that prepares an individual, work-based learning or training that prepares an individual to enter an apprenticeship. So it needs to lead to an apprenticeship. We've got the regular registered apprenticeships, and those are expanding very quickly. We've got a lot of new initiatives that we have opened up just recently, things in transportation, distribution, and logistics, et cetera, et cetera. Then we've got class size training. Now, the class size training can be in combination and is required under the registered apprenticeship, but it can certainly be in combination with the work-based learning as well. So you could have upfront class size training, or you could have parallel class size training while they're in a work-based learning or on-the-job training program. And then, of course, we've got incumbent worker. Now, an important factor in incumbent worker when it comes to training is the work-based learning or the on-the-job training. We cannot reimburse for wages to an incumbent worker. So for incumbent worker training, we are primarily focused on class size training, or we could reimburse the wages, some of the wages for the individual providing the work-based learning. But that would have to be clearly spelled out, and we would have to have a clear understanding of how that's going to function and operate for us to evaluate whether we could do that or not. So in the work-based learning, we have the on-site training to upgrade skills. A lot of people, and I think we've even identified it as wage reimbursement here as well. But remember, on-the-job training, work-based learning is not wage reimbursement. It is in fact paying for the training that an individual is going through while on the job. So the types of reimbursement that we can do that are spelled out in the notice of funding opportunity are generally, if it's 50 or fewer employees, then we generally ask for, or we generally will reimburse 75% or more of the wages. If as we move up in a succession of 50 to 100 or 100 and over, the wage reimbursement continues to reduce because we anticipate that companies that are of a larger scale have a greater ability to reimburse, and we're trying to recognize that small business is a critical component in the workforce, and we want to afford them every opportunity for the on-the-job training and the opportunities that are out there for that. The registered apprenticeship certainly has employer involvement. It is a critical component in the structuring of the registered apprenticeship programs. We can have further discussions if you have questions on that. We would entertain those. Mike did say that we are going to do some customized bidders conferences for those of you that are organizations and know a group of businesses and would like for us to come out and talk with them. I would encourage you to get a hold of us in the next month or so, and we'll coordinate an opportunity for us to come out and talk and address specific questions pertaining to them. The structure of the apprenticeship, we are looking for registered apprenticeships, but again, you can have programs that lead to apprenticeships, whether it be pre-apprenticeship programs that have a registered apprenticeship component factored in, or you can customize a classroom training and OJT program that you cite you would like to work towards getting it registered as an apprenticeship moving forward. We like the registered apprenticeships because we can, they are automatically eligible on our training provider list, and they are also an opportunity for a nationally recognized credential. And the current administration is highly favors the registered apprenticeship programs. Class size training, we're not looking for long-term training. We are genuinely looking for training that, although it may be off-the-shelf curricula, it still can be customized. We're looking for training organizations that can offer flexibility in terms of the actual classroom training portion of this, and some real pilot and innovative opportunities to get folks the classroom training that they need. And this can also include the bridge programs. So that's kind of an important part of target populations as well, and so we would look for some of those too. The incumbent worker training, I've talked to you a bit about that already. It can get confusing between the incumbent worker and the dislocated worker and the adult populations, but we are looking for skill upgrades to someone that's on the payroll. The employer must contribute at least 10%, and that scale slides as an employer gets larger. So 50 to 100, we would look for a higher matching, and that is identified in the notice of funding opportunity. And then 100 plus, we would look for even a greater matching. The match on that can be the employee's wages, and in many cases, incumbent worker training, that is in fact what the employer offers. So in other words, they pay the wages while someone's in a classroom training for a 2-hour period of time. And that generally will meet their match percentage. But there are other opportunities to come up with additional matches. And obviously, the more we're meeting the need of that employer, and the more the match, the more flexibility you have to reach out to other organizations, other businesses, and offer additional services. But there's the breakout that I just talked about. This is just a recap on the types of training and the different opportunities under each of the categories that are listed. And I'm not going to go into that too much. I think everyone can kind of see that on the PowerPoint. The third component, which, although it's the third component, is an absolutely necessary, critical component or concept in this particular grant. This specific grant requires that employment be identified. So we are not looking to fund training programs. That is not the intention of the Talent Pipeline grant. We are looking to fund training that has employment directly linked to it. So individuals, you have an MOU or a letter of commitment from the employer that those employers have already expressed, and you're already working with them and have concluded that, yes, in fact, if this person goes through this training or they train at our facility, they will, in fact, receive employment. So it's very, very important. Without this number 3, it's highly unlikely that a grant award can be given. We need that employment as a factor for this funding opportunity. Number 4 is the development of unique partnerships. So in the 3 or 4 years, we've learned that there's a lot of opportunities there are cases where the grantee is actually the training entity and has a direct connection to the employer. So the unique partnership there is to the employer. I would say that a lot of times there are three components to the grantee. The grantee then becomes an intermediary, which is identified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And that intermediary is the developer of the partnership between a training or an educational institution and the employer. So in many cases, it's associations that have multiple employers. Now, I do want to say that if you do not have experience with the IWDF and the IWTF systems, the reporting systems that we need, it will be critical that you have at least as a partner the local workforce area or a provider to the local workforce area that is familiar with the systems that we have. So in many cases, the intermediary has turned out to be the actual grantee, especially in the north. We've found that to be very successful, and they have partnered with some very unique partners and put together quite a nice program that they've been able to sustain now. We talked about the reporting requirements for incumbent worker. It is the IWTF system for the adult and the dislocated worker. It is the IWDF system. And so you would need to identify in your grant application who is familiar with this system and who has access to that system. Again, it spells out in the NOFO that if you are not a provider to the local workforce area or not the local workforce area, you will need to partner with one of those folks. And that can be as a subcontract or whatever you see best fit on that. The MOU is very critical in this, in identifying these partners. So, a lot of times people cite different organizations that they've worked with historically or in the past, but we need to see that there is a clearly articulated outline of what each partner under this grant application will be responsible for, so we can tie it all together and understand how this grant will work moving forward. The fifth is what makes this a pilot project. So we're not looking to circumvent the local workforce areas that already have a lot of terrific programs and are putting people back to work. We are looking to expand what is already out there. So discussing how this is a pilot project, how this pulls connections together, and what makes this project unique will be really important and has been one of the key deciding factors in many of our previous grant awards. And the sustainability is very, very important. Mike said these funds are intended to seed pilot, unique employment opportunities and strategies moving forward. But within that, we also need for folks to clearly identify either through, there's multiple ways that you can discuss, deliverables towards a sustainable grant opportunity. And that would be, you intend to show the success of your program and work with the local workforce area moving forward. You intend to seek, because of the success of this program, you intend to seek additional funding or additional matching funds from the employer. So there are a wide variety of ways that you can achieve this articulation of sustainability. Mike's already talked about some of these things, but we went ahead and put them in again, specifically towards what we're looking for in these talent pipeline grants. You know, what is your capacity for this? Do you already have a number of grants going on, and do you have the capacity to take on a new project? How successful were your previous projects? So all of the dot points, I don't want to sit here and read all of these dot points to you, as you have the PowerPoint available to you too. We are also taping this so you can refer back to these. But you know, the capacity is really important, and what's been your previous kind of deliverable in previous grants. If you have not had a grant with us, then, you know, I would encourage you to talk about, you know, what you have done in the past and how you've been able to manage those grant opportunities successfully with other funding sources. The documentation of need. So if you're identifying a group to be served, whether it be incumbent worker, whether it be dislocated worker or adult, how did you come to that conclusion that, and what's your connection to that group? So historically, have you always worked with economically disadvantaged adults in this particular area? You want to point out what your connection is and what the need is specifically. Why do you see this particular group, and how can you justify that this particular group is a high priority group for you? Project quality and coordination. You know, honestly, I'm going to say it just because I never really hear people say it too much, but did you follow the directions in the NOFO? I am always surprised at how people submit applications and they come to the conclusion that we will, you know, we're going to make these connections because we know of your organization. No, assume that the reviewer does not know anything about your organization. We don't want you to submit volumes and volumes of paper that is a lot of fluff, but when it comes to the project, you need to clearly talk about what your connection is to this, the delivery methods, the credentialing. Have you run this program before? What's you know, innovative about this? How are you going to sustain it? You know, what partnerships have you developed? So all of those things are really important, and don't assume we know it, because that's where a lot of people fall, is not making these connections for us and helping us see. Many times when we read these projects, we can come to the conclusion that, yes, you know, this is probably what they meant, but we can't rest on that. We have to just pick what you submit and go with it from there. And if it doesn't meet, and you haven't read the application and answered all 6 of those previous questions, and then each of these topics that we're discussing here that have been laid out for you, then it's highly likely that you know, the project will be rejected then in terms of the talent pipeline grant. Cost effectiveness, return on investment. You know, does the cost of this make sense? We're not looking for to spend $50,000 on somebody getting a $40,000 a year job. It just doesn't make sense to us. So you need to have thought through all of that process and be able to describe to us an account for all of the costs that are in this particular grant opportunity. We are not looking to primarily fund for personnel and staff costs, but we certainly want to be able to see and identify and have that budget spelled out for us, that you have the capacity based on the staff that you will be employing for this. So lots of factors here that are important, and we would love to see an identified return on investment in the application for each of the employers, what you anticipate the return on investment to be for each of the employers. That would be great to see that. We've seen a few applications that have come in that way, and it really helps to clarify it. So the summary is applications must be completed and addressed with all of the required elements, which I went through. Although it is May 1st of 2018, you can certainly submit before that. And we would encourage that once you've gotten all your questions answered, that you submit it as early as you possibly can. Funds are limited. Mike talked about what for the statewide innovation grants, what the funding cap is on that. For this grant opportunity, it's somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 per grant application. But let me say this, that we have seen some fantastic projects that have come in for $30,000 or $50,000. When it comes to these particular projects, the talent pipeline projects, a very strategic, focused approach seems to be the most successful. And when you attain that, the deliverables that you've identified successfully, you can always seek to expand that opportunity that you've applied for. And I would encourage that rather than coming into us. Some of the more unsuccessful ones are folks that come in and say they're going to serve 200 or 300 people, and it's very hard to meet those categories. One other thing I want to talk about in terms of target populations is don't box yourself in on the target populations. Clearly identify those target populations, but be careful of boxing yourself in too narrowly because it can make it difficult to meet your deliverables on that. Mike, did you want to jump in with any of the additional summary items or anything else on this?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Just a couple of things to keep in mind on the innovation side. Remember, we're not looking for folks that are looking to supplant funding that may have gone away from another source to keep something that they're doing operating. However, if you have an existing program but have never really partnered with the workforce system or haven't partnered with businesses before, and you're looking to modify that program or make adjustments or tweaks and be more business-oriented or work with the workforce system in a way that you haven't before, that's something we would take a look at. But we definitely want to focus people's attention on the innovation side, is that we're looking for new and improved ways of doing business. So we would encourage folks to not apply if you're just looking for additional funding to keep doing what you've always done.
Thanks, Mike. So the next slide is online dedicated resources, and you can see there is a I don't know whether you guys can see my arrow or not, but there is materials, and the risk analysis should be under there. If it's not, I haven't looked at that yet, but we should add that risk analysis documentation under there, Chelsea, to ensure that that's there. But this is a great resource. This tells you the overall concept of the opportunity, and both Mike's opportunity and my opportunity, the talent pipeline and the statewide innovation opportunities. These same type pages exist for both of those and have lots of resources in addition to frequently asked questions section on here as well. I do want to, I glanced over, I couldn't help but look over at a couple of the questions. Does the bridge program have to connect to an apprenticeship? It needs to connect to certainly employment. I don't think it has to connect just to an apprenticeship, but we'll answer that in the FAQ and get a definitive answer on that. I did see one more regarding the adults. Because these programs are funded through WIOA, you must meet the eligibility. So you must meet incumbent worker eligibility. You must meet adult eligibility, and you must meet dislocated worker. So if you're going to be served as one of those categories, then you need to meet that that eligibility, or we can't use WIOA funds for that. So it looks like Chelsea's going to be posting the risk analysis document to the materials section.
And let me jump in on the bridge question also. For the innovation opportunity, if you look on page 6 and 7, there are a couple of references to how bridge programs could be utilized for an innovation grant. The direct answer is no, it does not have to be directly tied to an apprenticeship, although that would be a plus. What we're looking for out of bridge programs for innovation is using a bridge program that helps create a new or improved pathway for success by preparing people to overcome a barrier to employment. So short answer is not necessarily, but if you can do it, that certainly is value added.
Yeah, I'm
Allison
trying to...
Angeloni has a question on restrictions on use of fund. There is not a direct limit in the innovation grant side. In fact, our grants don't necessarily even have to be used for training at all. But obviously, the more the better. As Patrick specifically mentioned earlier, we really don't want to be funding staff costs and overhead as the majority of the effort. In most cases, there may be...
And Mike, we do have a variance under the Illinois Talent Pipeline. We have a variance in, you or John may have to clarify that, but I think personnel and staff and then program overhead, I think we have a 10% variance on that.
Right. Actually, I was going to come to that in the part coming up, but there is a 10% limit on admin, and then there are various measures of indirect costs that may be applied, and we have information on those in the notice, and you can read more about those there.
Elia 2 also asked incumbent worker, or I don't know whether it's a statement or a question. It says incumbent worker training still have company match as defined by DOL by size. Yeah, that's we talked about that in one of the slides. So I don't know whether it's Julie or who's on from Elia 2, but yes, there is a match that's required for incumbent worker training. And so that was one point that I wanted to make sure I clarified, because that is, you know, that is brought up in the NOFO in it, and it's not quite as clear as we would have liked for that to be that. I think you're on, Mike, with slide number 39.
Ah. All right. Thank you, Pat. Okay, so moving forward, here are the application requirements. I don't want to read through these. This is kind of a highlight of what you will find in the notice. But we're very quickly, we want a brief executive summary that describes what you're going to do and gives us very quickly a pretty good understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it. Okay? In the technical proposal, here's where we want more of the details, and then very specific schedule on what's going to happen when. Are there any milestones or benchmarks along the way? What is the capacity of your staff to handle this? We want to see that if somebody's going to be in charge of a project or a program, that they have a reasonable history and understanding of how to run these sorts of things. And then there are the state, not just Commerce, but the entire state of Illinois is moving toward uniform grant applications and budget forms, and there's more information on those in the NOFO. Parts of the uniform application are very standardized, basic stuff. It's easy to answer, information about your organization and instructions on how to submit. Who do we contact? Where, what, and when, and how much are the project? This is kind of summary information. And then also, are you certified and like an officially approved grant applicant? I'll talk more about that in a minute. Our budget template is modeled after federal financial forms, so if you have ever filled out an SF 524, it's very similar to that. We define our basic budget line items. Those are things that if you've done a grant or if you administered a government program before are going to be very familiar to you, like personnel costs, contractual, those sorts of things. Keep in mind the 3 pillars of public fiscal management. Is what you're doing allowable under the program? Is it reasonable? And are the costs allocable to the grant? So if you're covering each, consider that your 3-legged stool. You got to make sure you're doing all of these things. 1 won't cut it, 2 won't cut it. You have to meet all 3 of these. Most of you have received workforce funds before, so you know all about that. Here's the new thing. If you are new to applying for state funding, you have to register and get pre-qualified through a new website that has been set up at the state level. This is in response to the state adopting federal Grant Accountability and Transparency Act standards. We will provide a detailed webinar on that if anybody wants to participate in that. We'll set up a time and publish that. And anybody that wants to learn more about GATA and that process, we will do a very thorough, deep dive into the nuances of how you go about that and meet those requirements for anyone that might be curious about that or need to know that. Also, in the meantime, prior to that webinar, the state does have a website set up. I will put it here in the chat room box for everyone to go to. It's basically illinois.gov/sites/GATA or GATA. And I'll type that in so everybody will have it. But you can go to that website and see in detail the information that you'll need to provide and actually even be able to apply and get the process started. This is out of the hands of Department of Commerce. You have to go through this and get approved, pre-qualified, and get on the list in order to receive our funding. So you may have an out-of-this-world application that we just love, but if you don't have this administrative task taken care of, we cannot issue a grant. So as Patrick spoke to earlier, we will have FAQs posted online. So some of the questions that you raised today, we will post those and responses. And then as individuals may send us other inquiries, and you can submit questions at these website, and we will respond to them online so that everyone that's interested in these grant opportunities has a chance to see the question and the answers, and everyone is on a level playing field. So, and again, each of the opportunities has its own web page on Illinois WorkNet. Also, if you're interested, besides these online resources, for the talent pipeline management opportunity, Lorraine Wareham is a contact and can help you. For the workforce innovation side, Gary Eichen on my staff is available, or you can also contact me.
Yeah, Mike, for both of us, either or they can go through Lorraine or Gary. But if you are an organization, I see a lot of folks on here that are organizations, and you would like for us to come to your region or come to and present more information on this to, say, a group of small business folks, especially we're doing a lot of this up north. I'd like to see more of it expanding downstate. So if you'd like for Mike and I to come and talk in greater detail about this, we would be happy to, and we are going to be holding at least 6 additional bidders conferences in person. This webinar is just to give an overview of the 2 opportunities that are out there. But certainly reach out to Lorraine or Gary, and they can work with us. I have one other question too, Mike. I saw on here Julie's asking about GATA, the budget template. Is that the same one? They're going to use the same one as they use for the formula funds?
Unless the state has updated the form since then, but my understanding would be it would be the same. Whenever it gets updated, it's going to be updated for everything.
Great. Okay, did you want to open it up for any additional questions then, or?
Yeah, there's one question that just popped up about technical assistance for proposal development be available. On the innovation side, because this is a competitive grant process, our technical assistance really is limited to technical questions about the process. We cannot, help people give them advice on filling out a better application or making it more robust, because that would be an unfair advantage. So that is the purpose of this webinar, and for the live bidders conferences that Patrick mentioned earlier. So if you do have questions, you can submit them online, or you can come to one of those events, and we'd be happy to respond to those in front of everyone. But we can't meet with you privately and say, if you really want to get a better grade, make sure to do X, Y, and Z, because that would bypass and it would taint the competitive process.
There's another, some of these questions we may have to just answer on the frequently asked questions. But Mike Baker, there's another one from Mike at the bottom there that is budget related.
Our employees' fringe wages? No. Historically, under WIA and we prior to that, it's the wages only, not fringe benefits.
No, but for incumbent worker training, remember that if it is a work-based learning, the individual that is the mentor, in some cases we call them, sometimes their wages as the trainer have been allowed to be incorporated into reimbursable costs.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point, Patrick. If a company is utilizing its own training capacity, that can be eligible for coverage.
Right. We have 2 companies that have done that historically in the past. So we know that is a potential workable solution.
That's a good question, Mike.
Any other questions?
Patrick, do you want to address the question from Mr. Bundy on adult eligibility, or would you prefer to do that later through the FAQs?
They need to be WIOA eligible, and in terms of meeting the local standard, I believe they would, but we'll get that. Chelsea, if you can move that over to the FAQs, and we'll get that identified and asked specifically, or answered specifically.
And to clarify to Mike, yeah, it's wages only, not fringe benefits, that count toward the match. Well, if there are any other questions, now's the time to type them. Otherwise, we thank you for your participation. And if you're interested in attending one of the live bidders conferences, they will be announced through Illinois WorkNet. And we also make the Illinois Workforce Partnership aware of events that will be held in particular local workforce areas. So, we will be getting the word out when we have dates, times, and venues established. And they'll also be available through an email blast through WorkNet. Anything else you want to add in closing, Patrick?
No, thank you all very much for your attention. We look forward to seeing you in person when we're doing additional bidders conferences. And if you have any additional questions, please post them to the FAQs, and we'll get those answered as soon as possible. Thank you all for your time today.
And we look forward